First of all, thank you so much for coming, Mark. Is Martin. It's a great pleasure to have you here on the Strategist Revival podcast. Thank you very much. You're very kind to participate, my friends.
Oh, my pleasure. Nice to meet you, Rafa.
Nice to meet you too. And I believe the first question would be from your experience, and then let's start with how did you become a strategist? When did you start? What have you studied, and how did you become a strategist?
So I studied psychology as a degree at university, and I think that was because I was about to study economics or law or something quite serious. And my form tutor at the time said, you either do well at things or really badly, depending on whether you're interested in them. So why don't you do a subject that you're excited by? Because I don't feel like you're that excited by going to do economics. You just feel like you should do that. So we started talking about psychology and understanding people, which was always something I was quite interested in. And the degree had a bit of maths, but a bit of science and a bit of art to it, and it was quite varied. And I then started to find out a little bit about advertising as a kind of career, and it is sort of linked to psychology, like getting in people's heads and figuring out how to sell to them. So it felt like I had a good basis. And someone from M&C Saatchi, which is an agency in the UK, came to present about what they did, and they were an account planner. And they talked about a campaign they had done for the Met Police. And I thought it was brilliant. I just was like, wow, that's so interesting how they understood people, how they flipped things on its head, and how they managed to get more people applying to be a police officer. And I just thought it was really smart. And so I kind of weirdly discovered the role of an advertising strategist quite early. I was still at university. I thought, oh, that is what I want to do. And then I applied everywhere to hundreds of agencies and got told no again and again and again. And then eventually got a job in the industry. And yeah, I feel like quite lucky that I chose something that sort of suits me as a person, I think.
That's fantastic to hear. And then as a psychologist as well, you have kind of learning and understanding better the consumer behavior, right? The behavior that the people with the message that you.
Yeah, I've always found it fascinating why people do the things they do and how they think and how you can influence behavior. So I suppose, yeah, like there's definitely an overlap between human psychology and advertising planning, I think.
And on that, I'm refreshing my brain as well on the things as I've mentioned before the recording over here. But how is the best way to grab an insight? Because what I do is a lot of desk research, using the tools, of course, to do the research, grabbing the assets on the client, the documents. But what's the best way to grab an insight? And on the insight is the best thing to do the four C's: consumer, category, company, and culture, or would you recommend something else?
Well, I think insights are kind of the currency for planners. Um, the only thing I'd say is that I think you can feel under a lot of pressure to come up with an insight in inverted commas and that it feels like this big revelation. And sometimes that's quite hard to do and it can feel like a lot of pressure. Um, I try to talk to our planners at Adam and Eve about just interestingness, just like find interesting things that can help inspire a really good idea. And those kind of interesting things can come, as you say, from different places. Sometimes it is, can you really understand your customer and their behavior and what's going through their heads and who they are as people and what motivates them that can unlock something. So, one example from us is we work on Marmite, which, depending if you're from the UK, you may not know. Like in the UK, Marmite is this something you put on toast, really, for breakfast, and it's this yeast extract spread, and it is famously either delicious or disgusting. Like you either love it or you hate it. Is the campaign, and we went to speak to young families about Marmite and we had breakfast with them and we went to sort of hang out with them and have breakfast. And it was really interesting because breakfast lasted on average 6 minutes. So we had breakfast with them and they're just like shoving cereal down the kids and everyone's in a bit of a rush and trying to put school uniform on. So, you get a real sense of like what it's like for people and the customer. And then we just found that they were increasingly having quite sweet things, sugary cereals, jam. And when we asked them about why they might try Marmite, they said, well, I hate Marmite, so my kids probably would too. And from that, we got to this idea of like the Marmite Gene Project, which was all around uh, finding out whether you were born to love or hate Marmite or whether it was nature or nurture. And it just came from understanding the customer, the discussions around the table, why they were choosing Marmite and not choosing Marmite. So sometimes I think going out into the wild and hanging out with real people and just seeing how they live and how they behave, it's kind of no substitute for that. And I think historically that's what planners did. They went and hung out in people's homes and did sort of went shopping with people. And now it's easier to just Google and maybe there's a bit of a lost art in really understanding people. So that's probably the first place to start is like the customer. But as you say, sometimes you can find interestingness in the culture around a brand and its place in society, and maybe its place in a bigger conversation. Um, One of my previous agencies was Wyden and Kennedy, and they very much understood culture and the broader conversation that was going on that a brand could tap into or create. And so that's another way to kind of come at things. Or maybe there's something interesting about the company in terms of its history or how it was founded or how it makes money or who started it or why it was first started. And so sometimes you can find an interesting thing or insight in terms of the company. So it can come from lots of different places, but I try to take the pressure off having the perfect insight, because I don't know, sometimes that can feel like a lot, but I think bringing interestingness to the table from different perspectives and chatting to creatives is often the best way forward.
That sounds amazing. And then for that, I would say the research, the qualitative research is like a few families that you want, the strategist want to do it, rather than hiring a consultancy to do it.
Yeah. Um, I started out as a planner at Abbott Vickers, and one of the things that I had to do there was go and run my own qual research. And I used to get £50 for running groups from some of the other planners. So I got to learn how to run groups. But some of the more interesting stuff was going to hang out in smokers' homes who were trying to quit smoking and just talking to them about what it was like and how they would try and smoke out the window, but with like they didn't like the wind blowing in because they were worried about their kids and where they'd hide their cigarettes. And you just start to really get into their mindset of how they feel and the guilt and the kind of rituals. I've also been to people's homes to talk about why they wouldn't drink Guinness at home and why are pubs so different to homes and why wouldn't you have a Guinness in the fridge and you know getting their favorite glass out of the cabinet and going, well, I've got a Stella Artois glass at home, so I couldn't put Guinness in that. And you just start to get the real texture of how people behave. So I kind of was brought up a little bit on that old school way of doing things. And I try to get our planners at Adam&Eve to keep up that spirit of doing their own field work and their own research as much as possible.
And today on your team, as a CSO of Adam and Eve, do your team does the same? Like they do this part of the qualitative research for each of the briefs, or eventually?
Not as much as I wish we did. We occasionally do things like a field day where we say, right, everyone needs to go and conduct their own research and try and do their own ethnographic study in an interesting way. Or so we do it from time to time. I would love it to be even more often. We also work with some brilliant research partners who do qual and ethnographic stuff with us, and they're phenomenal. But uh, I always think it's a brilliant place to start in terms of if you're a bit stuck on a project or you're new to a brand, like going to speak to people and going to understand their behaviors and how they feel about that brand and how they feel about that category and how they feel about its place in their lives. It's just always a good place to start, I think.
Okay. And which tools do you and your team use the most? Like Work or TGI or something like that. TGI is for media, but we use a lot over here in Brazil to understand consumers' behavior.
Yeah, so we have in our planning and strategy department, we also have a numbers department, which is a handful of data analysts, which Les Binet oversees. And they are constantly looking at the numbers to try and find insights, but also prove that our advertising is effective. So our planners can ask them questions and ask them anything really, and they've got a variety of different data sources that they can pull on. We also use Google search trends quite a lot at the moment. So we're constantly trying to push for an extra bit of understanding that might give us the kind of edge when we're developing campaigns. But I think wherever possible, we try to use a combination of numbers and quant, but also humanity and the qual research and the sort of empathy. Because I think if you can get the two of those working, that's when you get onto something really quite powerful, I think.
And the empathy is like putting yourself on the size of the consumer, on the place of the consumer to understand better and to generate those ideas, insights, and that persona.
Yeah. Yeah, I think really good planners tend to have really strong empathy. They're able to put themselves in someone else's shoes, or they've spoken to enough people and been sensitive enough to really kind of start to understand what makes people tick, but also potentially being humble enough to say, I'm not the target audience here at all. I don't know what football fans feel like, so I'm going to go and speak to them. Or I don't know what it I don't know what it's like to retire. I'm still a long way off, so I'm going to go and speak to people who are about to retire about how they feel. But constantly being interested in the human sort of psyche and sensibility. Because I think you have to have that. You have to be able to tap into that. Um, yes, sometimes you are the target audience, and sometimes having a great hunch or your own intuition can be really strong. So I don't tend to subscribe to the fact that you can't have your own personal point of view either. But I think, maybe have a hunch, but then also speak to people to see if it's true.
Done that, the empathy I've mentioned to you before as well about my connection that I had when I was working at Meta with diverse tech and inclusion and advertising that I gave here in Latam, workshops and training sessions.
Mhm.
I had a training session with over 3,000 people from Latam that I'm very proud of it. But it's about transforming their behavior as well in a way that they can think about that frequently, not only on the class. So do you have an idea to do that more? How do you do today, and how diversity, equity, and inclusion can the planners help the creatives to think about that and break the stereotypes of advertising?
Well, so I think the first thing I'd say is that, DE&I has been a conversation in our industry for a while now, and it should have been a conversation a lot earlier. And for me, I think there needs to be more of a sort of powerful, positive narrative around it, because it leads to better work when you have difference around the table. So if you've got a bunch of people who have the same experience and the same background and the kind of similar way of thinking, I think by definition, you won't get to as interesting answers. So when you have that diversity and you have the different perspectives and different life experiences, you tend to get to richer places that you wouldn't necessarily get to before. So I've always worked in a way where I love to collaborate with people. I love to hear different perspectives because often it's better than what I have in my head, and then I can steal it or I can build on it. So I think having a real diversity in an advertising agency is just better for business. And I think that's the sort of start point. We've started to do some things at Adam and Eve where we have things like First Bite, which tries to bring in new people to the industry that might have a different kind of background. And we've found that that's been a brilliant initiative. We've hired 3 people already from that scheme, and they've come in and been amazing because they just come at things a little differently, and that's just a brilliant asset. And we've also started to think quite carefully about our responsibility as one of the biggest advertising agencies in the UK in terms of the stories and the representation that we have on screen. So in the past, we've worked with the International Paralympic Committee to create movements around disability, because 15% of the global population have a disability, and so we've created work that tries to create equal opportunity and show that really there's a lot of similarity. Really, we shouldn't focus on the difference. We should focus on the similarity. And that campaign, which we created, We the 15, we're very proud of. But we've also increasingly told stories of diversity. So for McCain, which is oven chips that that we sell in the UK, our campaign there for a long time has been about We Are Family, and it's been about representing modern Britain and all the shapes and sizes and difference in families. But often the thing they have in common is that they all love chips on the dinner table. So, and that campaign's been very effective for McCain in terms of justifying their price premium and creating a sense of affinity with that brand. So there's another example of where when you get DE&I right for a brand, it does pay back. It's not just like the nice, good thing to do. It's good for business as well. And that's, I suppose, what the story that I'd like to get across. And we've also tried to tell stories that have more depth to them. So one of the things that we noticed in advertising was that there'd often be this kind of montage effect where a client would go, we've got a 30-second ad, so we want to make sure that we show lots of different sorts of people in this ad. And you end up just kind of ticking boxes. Whereas we wanted to try and also tell stories that had real depth and humanity to them, where it wasn't necessarily about the difference. They just, maybe that person happened to have a disability, for example. And so we told stories of Virgin Media. We told this story of two people online falling in love whilst gaming, and then they meet in real life. But the guy just happened to be in a wheelchair. It wasn't the front and center of the story, but it was just representation in a kind of implicit way. And so we're really trying to, in all ways, push DE&I, because I think the industry's still got a long way to go. I saw stats fairly recently that still showed we're a long way behind in terms of really representing people. So we take that responsibility seriously, and we want to keep pushing.
That's fantastic. I want to see. I haven't seen that ad on the gaming, the wheelchair love, and
I'll send you it after.
Oh, please, thank you so much. And I'm very, of course, not only keen, but wanting to do more of that. Each advertising campaign that I would work for, that I am working as a freelancer at the moment. But 0.3% of the ads, 4,000 ads that there was an analysis from Meta that created that presentation that I've mentioned. Only 0.3% of the global ads had someone with physical issues, ECD. So that's in less than 1% with LGBTQ+. And also they didn't feel represented when there was one. They didn't feel represented by the ad. So what you've mentioned about representing as well, not only being present, but represent that audience.
Yeah. I mean, I know that advertising is primarily there to sell things, and sometimes the industry forgets that it is here to sell. But at its best, advertising can also change culture for the better, because we represent things on such scale in front of people's eyes the whole time that we can use that influence for good. So yeah, we definitely take that responsibility seriously.
And how it is to present to the client? Does the clients accept it easily? What do you recommend for the planners to bring that, or for the agencies as well, but to bring that on the presentation of the potential ad campaign for the client, so he can understand that, or she can understand that?
Well, I think it's probably two things. I think one thing is what I alluded to earlier, which is that it's not just the right thing to do, it's good for business. So you can create more affinity, you can create more emotion, you can create a greater sense of belonging. You can really appeal to an audience when you do diversity and inclusion well. So that's a kind of start point. And the second point is that we always make sure that we involve and listen to the community that we might be representing. So we never try to assume that we know what it's like. So when we created that We the 15 campaign, that was completely in collaboration with people with disability at every stage, like the initial research, but also the casting, the way that the film and campaign was created. It wasn't through our eyes at all. It was through the audience's eyes. when we created a campaign for FIFA about the Midnight Ramadan League, that was collaborating with the Muslim community and all the South Asian footballers and that particular team to create that campaign really authentically. Because we don't I think you have to be humble enough to appreciate that you don't know what it's like through someone else's eyes. And so the best thing to do is really speak to them and involve them in creating that campaign. So I think it's those two things. It's that it's also good for business, which is what all clients want, but that we're going to make sure that we're telling the story through people's eyes rather than assuming that we know what it's like.
It's amazing. I want to see all of those ads that I haven't seen. But that's amazing to think about how to build that more frequently. And in terms of building, what do you think about the frameworks for strategists? You have like the creative brief is here, just fill it, or I don't know, the deck, or do you have the frameworks to use to create the strategy for each of the briefs from the client that you receive?
Uh, we do have some frameworks. We do have a creative brief template. For a long time, we resisted having a creative brief template because we kind of wanted everyone to make it their own. But then as a group, we kind of decided that actually it would be good to have a common structure. And so we use quite a popular creative brief template, which is get to buy so. It's very simple in terms of like get, and you describe the audience who behave in a certain way. To is the behavior, and the buy is the kind of the springboard. And so is the result that you're looking for. So we tend to have a very short creative brief that, we've got the short of it, and then we have the long of it. So we also have maybe presentations and stimulus and films and pictures and pieces of writing and things that back that up. But we try to kind of have that as our consistent creative brief template. So it's kind of a framework of sorts. But we don't necessarily have a one way of doing things. Like we don't have a way that we always do our presentations. As an agency, we have an ethos which is about putting feeling first. So everything we do is about emotion. So humans don't really like thinking, but they do like feeling. And lots of the popular psychology out there that Daniel Kahneman kind of led suggests that we are kind of quite primal animals who act on emotion. And so we try to show that we understand that in the advertising and brand communications that we create. So we tend to lead with big emotional, not necessarily always kind of weepy stories. Sometimes it can be making people laugh or making people feel safe or nostalgic or angry or any of the kind of spectrum of emotions. But we start with how do we get people to feel something so that we stop them in their tracks, they engage with it, and we leave an impression on them, because too much advertising just leaves no mark, leaves no impression. And so we want to make sure that we're in the kind of the minority of advertising that somehow leaves an imprint. But how we get to that feeling is different each time, I think.
Fantastic. Daniel Kahneman talking about the mental and emotional points. And then on the UK, I had the opportunity to work for more than 4 years over there, and I've learned a lot. What do you believe that's the difference is the uniqueness on the UK, like the difference between the working in UK but yeah, being a strategist in the UK and the rest of it, because you are the co-chair of APG as well. So what is the moment what are you giving the courses more about, the teams and the things, and what's the difference between the UK strategies and others?
Well, I think we're quite fortunate being planners and strategists in the UK because we're in the country where the discipline started. And it started at BMP and JWT, and the kind of the original planners were in London. So it feels like it's kind of the home of planning, and there are quite a few agencies in the UK that really uphold those traditions and really value the art of account planning and strategy. We have the IPA Effectiveness Awards here, which is a huge award show every 2 years and the most rigorous effectiveness competition. So that is kind of led out of the UK by the IPA, and we also have the APG Creative Strategy Awards, which is the other side of planning, where it's the kind of creative strategy bit in terms of being maybe expansive and helping creatives get to amazing work as well as proving it works. So we have award shows that have been running for a long time, and I think a lot of history and heritage of just brilliant planners who worked in really iconic agencies and did amazing work and maybe founded agencies as well. Some of the most iconic startups in the UK have had a planner in the photo from the beginning as a founder partner. So I think it's really it's really kind of integral to agencies in the UK. I can't necessarily speak for lots of different countries around the world, but I think the UK just has that kind of history and heritage that means that planning is at the table from the outset.
It's a great source of learning. And on APG, which courses are you actually giving? Well, I know different ones, but what's the main topic that people are looking for to learn with you and that
Uh,
you use?
so we have all sorts of training on all sorts of things. So we have training that is about kind of arriving and thriving. So if you're new as a junior planner, how do you get the job in the first place and then begin to excel and learn? We also have training that is for people who are starting to move into that kind of management role, which is often very different to being an account planner. When you start to then have to manage people, that's very different. So we offer training in that space. We offer lots of training on how to use data, how to do qual research, how to argue and create pitch presentations. In the past, I've run training on how to write creative briefs, which I've done for a few years. So there's all sorts of training, and I think there's not necessarily enough training in the industry for account planners and strategists, and that's partly why we do what we do. But also, we're very open to listening to the community. So if Rafa, you were to say, "Oh, I feel like you should have training on semiotics and symbolism and how we use that," we can create training for that because we are for planners and strategists. We're here to sort of serve that community. We're currently looking, as everyone is, at AI and the effect that that's going to have on the industry and on our discipline. So we have Tom Roach, who's leading that as a kind of an experiment. So yeah, we're always in service of the community. So we have an array of training, but we're always open to new sorts of training too.
And on that, I just have 4 minutes more in terms of recording over here, but
Okay.
that was the last question about AI. How does it help the planners? And sometimes I was, on the beginning of it, I was afraid that, oh, it will steal my job as a planner because people just ask AI. So how can we use in the best way possible to help us in terms of building the strategy for each client?
I mean, I think AI slightly blows my mind, to be honest. If I spend any time thinking about it and its ramifications and it getting infinitely better over time, it could totally transform the way we all work, never mind the advertising industry. I think right now, how our teams are using it at Adam and Eve is you can use it to do desk research very quickly. So you can collect a lot of information very quickly. So it just saves you some time. It's more efficient. We've also built things where it can show you dumb ideas. We have a dumb ideas bot. Basically, you can put anything in and it will share 5 ideas. And sometimes that's good if you're stuck because you might think, oh, that's rubbish or no, that's obvious. But it just gets you thinking. So you can use it as kind of stimulus. We've also used it to sort of pull different data sources together as well. So we've recently created Les Burnett, who works at Adam and Eve. There's now Les GPT. So we don't really need Les anymore. We can just use Les GPT and ask him all of the questions, and it's been fed all of Les's research, and it replies on his behalf. So we're using it around the edges, but I think everyone has got to kind of embrace it and keep playing with it and practicing with it because otherwise you might get left behind a little bit. But I don't think for the foreseeable future it's going to take away the brilliance of the human mind. At least I hope it doesn't. because I think when a planner or strategist does a brilliant job and they kind of pull together some information, but then make a lateral leap, or they just see something with, they just imagine the future in a very different way. AI can't do that yet. And I think that is a skill that hopefully will become more valuable over time because AI allows people to reach the middle more quickly. And the best planners and strategists find very different lateral ways into problems. So I hope that will still be a really valuable thing for us to be doing, at least for the next few years.
Oh, my friend, thank you so much, Martin, for having this conversation with myself, and of course, being allowed for myself to share this with the planets all over the globe, especially with the Latin America ones. And thanks a lot. It was a great class
Okay.
for me, about learning and have inspirations, especially on, as you know, the diversity, equity, and inclusion, the D&I, in terms of the ads that you have at Adam&Eve created over there, and to think better about how can I also train. I will give classes on a university over here about ESG and advertising. So also about how to do better on those classes as well. Thank you so much.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.